And you've just heard Circle Line by Fish from the album 13 Star, which is just one of the many, many records to be made into vinyl by SeaBass Vinyl. And I'm delighted to be joined by David Harvey, who is the co-owner and founder of SeaBass Vinyl. Hello, David.
Hi, Alistair. Thanks very much for inviting me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. Can you give us some background to SeaBass Vinyl?
So, SeaBass Vinyl, we're based in East Lothian, just about 20 kilometers outside of Edinburgh. We sort of had the idea to set the pressing plant up in probably 2022. Spent a year and a half researching a site, building a factory, and made our first record on the 29th of November, 2023 rather. And that actually was that Fish record that you've played there just now, which was a test pressing that we did for Fish, which we then brought to the Lynn demo rooms to listen to on the 30th of November, which is quite a baptism of fire.
I like how the dates are seared into your mind.
Those ones are, yes. The rest of it's a bit of a blur since then.
And how did the connection with Fish come around?
Well, that's a very, very funny, crazy story. So we, middle of June, July, we got contacted on Instagram by Fish directly and said, "Hi, I'm Fish. Can you contact us, please?" And he followed us on Instagram. I think he follows about 5 people and has many thousands of followers.
Sure.
I'd like to talk about making a record. I'd already heard that from a former colleague of mine in my old world, that Fish had pressed some records and had actually had to refund all of the customers because he was unhappy with the quality of the records that he'd received back, and those records had all been destroyed. So he contacted us. I went to meet him, had a coffee with him, and actually had Callum Malcolm, who had done the remastering of the work, was also there. Ran through the plans for what we were talking to do, about how we were intending to set the factory up, what our sort of our ethos was, our focus, and an emphasis on sustainability, an emphasis on quality, etc. And we probably had 3 or 4 meetings and multiple coffees over at his place in Haddington, which is literally about 5 minutes drive from the pressing plant, which is the other massive coincidence.
Yeah.
I think they were sort of confident. Callum was also providing sort of his opinion as well about what, did we know what we were talking about? Was it credible? And because at the time we didn't even have a building, we were just actually a field still at that stage. And then around August time, confirmed that he would like to go ahead with us, so that we would get to the opportunity to press his record. And we do lots of phenomenal records, but it's a bit of a unique one, especially as a first project to do, because partly because of the quality issues and the history of it, but the actual package itself is, as a vinyl record, is like as good as it gets. So it's a product that's been remastered by Callum Malcolm, who is world renowned, obviously a Scottish legend, and then the records themselves were half speed cut by Barry Grint down in Ayr from London. And again, he's an absolute legend in the world of lacquer cutting, one of the, probably, if not one of the very top people in the world in that role as well. So it was a hugely high profile, high quality package on 180 gram vinyl, black 180 gram vinyl, and we basically had nowhere to hide. So
So you started off, really high standard, that's the opening point. And how did the idea of SeaBass come around then? How did Fish know to approach you if this was the first thing that you were doing?
I think it was Steve Vantis, who works with them, plays with them, who, and co-writer. I'll probably need to clarify that exactly what his role is, if that's all right.
That's okay.
Yeah. So Steve Vantis let him know that we were actually setting up a factory. And again, just the way that Fish's mind works, and I suppose it was just serendipitous that he's called Fish and we're called SeaBass. And if that wasn't enough of a coincidence, then it was the fact that you can almost see his house from the roof of the pressing plant that we're 5 minutes away. So that's, I think, how we heard. We hadn't done much more. Our process or approach had always been to sort of grow via word of mouth, and sort of organically at the beginning, rather than do any marketing, because we wanted to keep that control on volume and quality and things like that.
So what was the inspiration behind starting SeaBass Vinyl?
There's a few different angles to it. I love vinyl as a format. I'm lucky enough to have a Linn turntable at home. I've had a Linn turntable for a long time, and as a medium, as a format to listen to music on, I find it the most enjoyable, the most rewarding, in terms of pure sound quality, but also just in terms of the actual physical, the physical aspect of it, etc. So I love it as a thing. We moved up from Manchester. So Dominique, my wife is French, she's a co-owner as well, and I'm Irish, obviously. Moved from Manchester in 2019, and we're looking to sort of have a change in direction from our previous lives as consultants, management consultants. And we had some familiarity with people who'd worked in the music industry, and it was just sold as something that an industry that we would love to be involved with somehow. And we wanted to try and set up a business up in Scotland when we moved up here that would sort of create some jobs, that would be something that we could be proud of, something that was just using a little bit different part of our brain to an extent to what we've been using before. And those are really the drivers. And obviously we knew that there was an element of an opportunity and demand for that as well, but we're well aware that demand was the manufacturing capacity was going to be growing quite a lot. So the stories of 1 year lead times or wait times for getting records pressed, etc. When we were thinking about this, we knew were going to go away because we had visibility of how many plants were opening, etc. So that story was slightly different. But those are really the drivers for it.
And you always knew, you said when you started the fish, when you had a field, and that was
yes.
it.
Yeah.
But you always knew you were going to build your own press, and that seems like a huge thing to kind of take on.
Well, so I suppose part of our move from Manchester up here was a sort of a quality of life thing, and we really didn't want to spend, an hour sitting in a traffic jam trying to go to Midlothian from East Lothian on the bypass in a traffic jam every morning.
Yeah.
So sort of part of our criteria was really to be somewhere close that we had actually reasonable commuter distance from home, and we then also wanted to be able to. It's a huge investment building this plant. So, just even the pipe work is all 3D designed and, offsite welded. The pipe work alone is £200,000 in the plant. So we wanted to be able to control our own destiny. If we were renting a unit or property, it created a huge variable for us and a huge risk for us. So we sort of got fortunate enough to win a bid on a plot of land in McMurray Industrial Estate via East Lothian Council, and got planning permission to build a property here. And then there were other reasons, huge, significant reasons for us around sustainability, etc. So we could design so for example, the factory is designed to be facing south with a mono pitch roof, so that the whole roof is covered in solar panels, for example. And we could design in the locations of wind turbines and things like that, which we would never be able to do if we were just renting a plant.
Sure. Yeah. And sustainability is kind of key to what you do. How does that make you different to other people that are pressing vinyl?
Well, I think to be fair to all the pressing plants, we all know that sustainability it's a business imperative, because we actually have to be reducing our costs. So sustainability is aspects of that for energy usage reduce our costs, but it's also very important to the music industry, to artists, etc., that they're conscious that vinyl kind of a reputation as being a bit of a dirty, it's a plastic product. So being as sustainable as possible to them is very important. For us, our ambitions were quite specific, is to be the most sustainable pressing plant in the world. We think we probably are not far off it, and we've invested probably over £400,000 in pure sustainability. So in terms of solar panels, in terms of cooling cooling infrastructure, all of our electricity is renewable sourced, which comes at an expense. And then we've just recently we're actually carbon neutral certified now. So we've been working with Carbon Neutral UK to actually get a carbon offset everything else that we do, to actually make sure that we haven't fully publicized that. You're probably the first person to know that, is that we're, as of about 2 weeks ago, we're carbon neutral certified, and that will be getting updated on our website as well. So that's a sort of a very meaningful commitment to us, which does differentiate us from the other pressing plants, and is important to customers. Sure,
absolutely. And how does that work out in terms of the physical pressing of a vinyl album? What's the process that happens there?
So within the four walls, so the process to actually make a record, the vast majority of people will have that digitally recorded or have it as a digital WAV file, which and they'll have their artwork, and they will come to us, and we will manage that process from work with the customer, of course, to manage that process from them giving us the artwork assets and the music to it actually leaving the factory here ready to actually go to the shops. So within the four walls here, the steps that the record needs to go through is that obviously the print side goes off to get some digital proofs approved. It gets into the correct template. It's actually be pressed, into the 3mm jacket sleeve, and the labels are very special, a specialist paper product as well. And then on the music side, in parallel, we'll be working with the cutting house to make a lacquer, which is normally the first analog version of your record of the music, the artist's music. So that's where a lathe will actually just cut the grooves into a slightly softer piece of plastic that then forms the base for all the future pressing. So we work with a number of different pressing lacquer cutters to do that. And they will send the lacquer. They then take those lacquers. We never do that in-house. We don't have the skills or the equipment to do that. We then work with a company called Stamper Discs, who are down in Sheffield, who are probably the best in the world at their job. In terms of making galvanics, they will take those lacquers and using an electroplating process will create a nickel mold of those lacquers that then, I don't know if I have one here. I have that would. So this is an example of a stamper.
Right.
So that would then allow, that's then got the sort of it's got peaks rather than grooves, but then, and this is actually a damaged one, that's why I'm touching it like this. And that would then allow us to, there's one of those on each side of the record, and that then actually forms the record. So once we've got the galvanics or the metal work back, we can then go into a process of starting to actually work with the artist to confirm that that's all correct. So we will do a test pressing for them with this metal work to check the basics, like are the tracks in the correct order, but also much more subtle things about, are you happy with the sound stage? Are you happy with the level of sibilance and some of the things that can specifically go wrong with making a vinyl record? To make sure that those are all okay. Once we've got that approval for the test pressing, then we go into the next step, which is to actually go and go into production. Once we've got the labels and the artwork, we press the record. We press a record roughly every 30 seconds, well, probably a little bit faster than that, but you can assume 30 seconds per record.
Wow.
So, if somebody orders 500 records, it's usually about a 4-hour run that we would press the records in 4 hours. It's sit for a day for 24 hours. And then they'll all get visually inspected and quality controlled, and then put into sleeves, shrink wrap, boxed, and then shipped.
And what's the kind of size of the operation then? It's surely not just the two of you doing that.
No. So we're about 7 employees, or seven people in total. It goes up and down a little bit. We've got some people that work part-time with us.
Sure.
And that's probably the right size for our order volume at the moment. We will expect to get that to grow up a little bit more in the next 2 to 3 months again. Because
there's this belief that in the last, I would say, 10 years, particularly, maybe more than that, that vinyl has had this big resurgence. Is that something that you've found, and are you getting busier?
I think we as a small pressing plant are definitely getting busier. Across globally, the statistics and everything else is that, yes, there's an increasing demand for vinyl. So it's growing in the UK by about 10 to 12% per year in terms of volumes of sales year on year. And the thing that may not be visible to people is that there's also a significantly increased amount of manufacturing capacity available from pressing plants as well. So this is what we knew. So basically, there's capacity globally to make about 350 million records a year, and there's probably demand for 250 million records a year. Yeah. So that means that there's overcapacity at the moment, which doesn't really impact us as a small pressing plant, but is having an impact on the industry. So some pressing plants are closing. Right. Some that are more established and some that are new are closing, and there will be an element of that, I think, for a little while as well as it starts to consolidate. From our perspective, we've got a few unique selling points. The the sustainability is very important for us, but also the Scottish market and the support from Scottish music industry and everybody associated with it has been absolutely enormous. So, 50% of our order book is probably actually Scottish artists. So that growth we start to see, and the important thing for us is that people start to recognize, or artists and labels, that it's easier to press records now than it used to be. So you're not going to be sitting there ordering a record and maybe waiting for it to come in a year's time. You should be able to order a record now and you will have it in 8 weeks' time. And that's
hugely, as quickly as that. That is amazing.
Yeah. And we indeed, you can even do it sometimes faster if it's a simpler package. Sure. But that creates huge benefits for the artists in that you can go on pre-sale on Bandcamp or wherever you're selling your records, and you can actually take deposits and you can commit to having those records shipped out to customers in 6 weeks' time. And that can actually pay for your production, for example. So that can pay for your actual production costs for the records, etc. I think just to come back originally to the other part of your question, I think the other bit that we see in terms of growth, or that I see in growth as a sort of a user, a purchaser of vinyl, is that when you go into shops now, first of all, the shops are all super welcoming of everybody from every demographic, in terms of supporting and helping people who don't necessarily know buying records. So that the people who go into record shops is different, and that has changed, and that's great. But also, the range of things that you can buy in the shops is greater because there's more manufacturing capacity and the turnaround is faster. So you can go in every second week or every month, and that there'll be 50 new records that you didn't see the last time there that have been recently released. Whereas that wasn't the case 2 years ago. Again, I don't think, and that drives that demand, I think, as well. And
so, how many do you know? How many albums you've actually passed through your hands?
In terms of customers, we've probably done I think we've got about 350 albums we've done this so far.
Wow.
And again, we're sort of slightly short lead times, but so we've done about 350. This is a sort of for the Scottish Album of the Year Awards, for example, last year there were approximately 300 albums that were submitted or registered as being relevant or qualified.
Yeah, it was around that,
And in the 6 month period that we were open, I think we had actually pressed about 25 of those records. So, we in only being open for 6 months, we'd done nearly 10% of the records that were eligible for that time period.
Yeah.
So, we do a lot of short runs. So it's not that we sit and we'll press, a million Billie Eilish records or something like that, or 80,000 of another record. We do quite a lot of short runs from 100 up to 1,000, and those sorts of units as well, which drives the number of records that we have, the number of customers and orders that we have.
So if any musicians are listening to this and they have an album, but they haven't considered getting it on vinyl, how would they approach you? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So I think if assuming they're self-releasing, it's basically get in touch with us at our email address. So mine is david.harvey@seabassvinyl.com, or go onto the website and contact us via the website. There's an info or a sales website there as well. And then we can get back to you. I think the key message for me is, for vinyl is an opportunity, it's a revenue stream for artists now. It's one of the few that people will have.
Yeah.
So even if it isn't us, do think about it. Every pressing plant will be helping people, is keen to help people and artists now to actually get their music onto a physical format. And it's definitely a process that's much more straightforward than it was in the past, and much lower risk from their perspective as well.
It's really interesting. I'm just thinking as we're talking, when I started doing Scots Whay Hae, people started sending me music. It was nearly always CDs, perhaps even cassettes. And I remember the first vinyl I got sent was Mitchell Museum's album, and that must be about 12 years ago now. And I didn't have anything to play it on, that's how much. But I still had kept my vinyl from my younger days, but I kind of wasn't playing it anymore. And it took a while, but then suddenly nearly everything that I want to own, I can get on vinyl. It's such a change.
Yeah. Like everything that's in a back catalogue will get re-released eventually. I think at this point, really, that's just the sort of the major labels that we're working with, or not larger labels that we're working with, are starting to go through that process as well.
Because there would have been bands in that kind of hinterland. Let's see, the 90s and noughties, who had released great albums, but would never have thought of putting them out on vinyl because CD is king.
Yeah, we've done 2 Run Rig albums so far, with Chrysalis, that I'm not sure that I don't know if they were ever released on vinyl, but certainly, you know, different audience and capacity and, you know, focus for them now.
And in terms, and you're obviously a huge music fan, that must be behind, you know, the reason for doing all of this. Who's your kind of musical inspirations?
I've probably got quite a narrow focus of music, I must admit. I'm seeing an awful lot of music that I discovering an awful lot of music that I didn't know about before. If I talk personally about music that I used to really like, you know, my favorite artist by far is Natalie Merchant, and 10,000 Maniacs. So it's sort of an album that I've listened to relentlessly since, you know, they first came out, and since I was in school. So I'm 53 now. So, you know, these are, you know, I was listening to that 10,000 Maniacs and then Natalie Merchant. I, you know, love Beck, Eels, so a lot of that genre of music. Listen to quite a few other quite a diverse range. I've got, you know, K Tempest is one of my favorite artists. Been to see them probably 6 or 7 times at this point, both in Manchester and spoken word stuff and concerts. So a huge fan of them as well. I'm trying to think. You caught me on the hop. I must admit there's so much stuff that we press now that I just can't understand. I'm so frustrated that it's not huge, that it should be like, you know, it should be on TV ads, etc. You know, and music that, you know, obviously artists that are very well known, like Horse, for example, that you mentioned, that I genuinely didn't know about before we pressed the record. You know, or Jill Lorien is another artist that we pressed for just recently, and I absolutely love the album. I think it's incredible. Zan Tyler, Emma Pollock. We haven't pressed Emma Pollock. Emma performed on Zan Tyler's record. You know, that range, all that type of music, and I've absolutely loved it.
It's a great list because they've all been on the show at some point as well.
Okay.
And we're going to hear a track from Jerry Burns in a moment, and that's someone, I guess, would Jerry have been on vinyl? We're talking when the album came out. I'm not sure it would, but there's someone who many more people should know about.
Yeah. So Jerry Burns was the first record that we did for Last Night from Glasgow. So it's a double album that we pressed, and I have to admit, it's a sort of a running joke, but it's probably the record that I put on every morning when I come into the plant at 7:30 and I'm on my own before everybody arrives. I just absolutely love it. I think it's just an amazing record. From every aspect of it, like, again, just the quality of the record itself and everything else, that, you know, every aspect of it I just absolutely love. And we've been lucky enough to meet Jerry a few times and get to know Jerry as well. So, I
mean, that's, you know, one of the things about doing this radio show is I get to hear so much great music that's coming out every week, and I guess that's you will be discovering in a similar way great new acts, as well as ones who perhaps you know, hadn't you missed first time round.
But that's actually probably my favorite part of the job, is actually doing test pressings. So I generally, Dominique is more on the order management and the supply chain side, and I'm a little bit more on the pressing side. I generally don't know what type of music it is that's arriving as it arrives as one of these stampers, and I put it on the press and do the test pressings and play it for the first time. So it's always quite entertaining for me whether it's going to be some sort of death metal record or is it going to be some folk record. You can sometimes guess by the name, of course, but that aspect of that discovery is probably my favorite part of the job, to be honest.
Well, I think you're doing it's a fantastic job. You know, your name comes up so often when I'm talking to people who are releasing albums, and they say, you know, we're working with SeaBass Vinyl, and it's been an absolute joy to do so. So, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.